Good afternoon, folks. I am Jason Williams, the chair of U.S. Telecom. I'm also the CEO of Blackfoot Communications. Welcome, everybody here in the room and joining us virtually. A little bit about Blackfoot Communications. We serve about 25,000 homes and businesses in western Montana and eastern Idaho across nearly 8,000 square miles of service territory in some of the most mountainous and rugged terrain in the lower 48. We have a lot to cover today, so let's jump right to it. But there's going to be one big takeaway. For the U.S. to be resilient, strong, and competitive for the long term, we need broadband. The population of Montana is about 1 million people. Historically, our economy has been one of extraction, timber, minerals, livestock. But now we have a huge influx of virtual workers and tourists. In fact, last year alone, the state of Montana had more than 13 million people come and visit. And whether they're working or playing, everybody wants broadband connectivity. Not to mention, don't forget that Montana shares about 500 miles of border with Canada, much of it isolated and remote. And did you know that Montana, more than any other state in the union, has more nuclear missile silos than anybody else? So connectivity, reliable connectivity, is not just important for me in Montana, but for lots of other folks as well. At Blackfoot, we're a cooperative. That means that our customers are our owners. But here at U.S. Telecom, we're part of something bigger. We stand together as one industry, large Fortune 100 companies to small rural providers like mine. We connect people in Midtown Manhattan, and we connect parts of remote Montana where grizzly bears and moose outnumber people. What unites us is our shared mission to deliver the best connectivity possible to as many people as possible. Reliable broadband level sets. It makes the promise that no matter where you live, you can access the world. In as many areas as possible, and where feasible, this means fiber. Now, there is no question that fiber is the fastest, most reliable, and most scalable form of broadband connectivity. Everyone in this room also knows that it is fiber that powers America's mobile wireless networks. And even satellite providers need fiber to connect their terrestrial base stations. So while the cost, the capex of putting fiber in the ground up front is significant, the ongoing operating expenses of fiber are less than other types of broadband technology. This means that in the long term, fiber is the most efficient. Remember, the fiber that we're putting in the ground today is still going to be lit and providing services 30 or even 40 years from now. Right now, our nation's defining commitment to rural America is broadband. But this commitment is being stress tested by a BEAD program that's been delayed and weighed down by political edicts far removed from the mechanics of speeding broadband where we need it most. In Montana, NTIA had approved our Volume 2, and last October, Blackfoot and dozens of other providers submitted applications to the BEAD program. We were ready to roll, but now it's come to a screeching halt. Our ability, this promise to deliver broadband in rural America is also being stress tested by our inability to get permitting reform over the finish line. Blackfoot received an NTIA grant on June 13th, 2023. Now, coming up on 2 years later, we have not turned a single shovel of dirt because we are waiting on permits. The commitment of America to deliver broadband to rural citizens is also being stress tested in the courts, and in particularly before the United States Supreme Court. where the Universal Service Fund, the very lifeblood of rural America, and the system that has been operating in its current form for nearly 30 years is being challenged. When the dust settles on this proceeding, we must sprint to create changes and implement new fixes to contribution reform. Despite these stresses, there are encouraging signs. Over at the FCC, Chairman Carr's delete proceeding is going to help us connect. There are literally countless policies out there holding our industry back. And it's exciting to see the FCC taking the necessary steps to help us move forward. For U.S. Telecom members, our shovels are ready, we're builders, and we're ready to work. We stand ready to bring our expertise to the table to get the job done. And we know the ideas shared here today can help jumpstart this process. So now let's dig in. To lead our first conversation, I would like to hand things off to Jeff England, the Vice Chair of U.S. Telecom. He's also the Chief Financial Officer of Silverstar Communications in Wyoming, and he's also my friend. So Jeff, please introduce the first panel.
Well, thank you, Jason, for your introduction and your powerful words on the work many of us are here to do, and for the friendship. As neighbors in the West, we rely on one another, and we're really grateful, Jason, for the opportunity to work with you. Our shovels are ready as well, and I'm excited to get to work with you, Jason, of course, as well as all of the U.S. Telecom members to connect as many people as possible to the reliable and affordable internet that broadband offers, regardless of where they live. As Jason mentioned, I'm the CFO at Silverstar Communications, where we wake up every day focused on connecting people across western Wyoming and eastern Idaho to the rest of the world. I've seen firsthand how important these connections are for rural communities, supporting our emergency services, our education, our businesses, and fundamentally our way of life. Clearly, I'm not the only one passionate about this, and we have an all-star panel of some doers and some movers that are here to talk about the work ahead and how we expand rural America's broadband future. So I'd like you to welcome with me Jake Baldwin, the CEO of the Cross Family Companies, Jennifer Prather, the CEO of Totelcom, Christy Westbrook, the CEO and General Manager of CTC, and we're incredibly grateful to be joined by Zil Joyce Dixon Romero from the National Rural Health Association, who can speak directly to how our work is critical to the communities that we serve. Thank you all again for joining with us today. So let's talk a little bit first about BEAD, and I'm hoping that we can maybe just kind of move right down the line to hear all of your inputs here on with regards to BEAD. It's just sort of been a long, strange trip that we've been on, as Jason mentioned. It's really been a long time since the hopes have been set and before we were able to start get some shovels into the ground. And we're a few years into the program, and now it's likely that we're going to start seeing some changes. And so I guess I'm just curious from you all, what are the biggest opportunities for some positive change to the program to make it more effective and to stretch every dollar as far as possible for some broadband deployment? So maybe Jake, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm actually going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say something that I think should not change, which is should leave the states to decide the alternate technology and the scoring and the priorities there. I think that was part of the original Infrastructure Act. I think the state of Oklahoma has done a good job with that, and I'd like to see that stay with the states. They're closest to the ground.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, so I'm in Texas, where we are honestly just a little bit behind a lot of other states. We were the dead last in getting our program approved. And so for us, I think it wouldn't be that hard to change some of those things. We're not that far down the path. And so it could really be an opportunity to take away some of those things that make deployments more costly than they have to be. I think it also gives a chance, just to throw a little plug in, for states to take a look at, I think the intent was really good behind a lot of it. We want to pay good wages. We want to make things sustainable. But you've already got a ton of companies out there that have been doing that for decades with some of those principles. And so maybe it gives an additional chance to take a look at that and figure out how to best use what's already there.
Yeah, thank you. Christy?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump a little bit on what Jake said. I do echo that the states should be able to make their decision of what's best for the states. Primarily in Minnesota, we have had a broadband program in place for several years. And so for us, all of the locations that are left are really high cost areas. And so number one leading concern definitely is the discussion around there being caps that are put in place of how much could be spent per location, and caps for Minnesota would be terribly detrimental.
Yeah, and I think that's especially relevant in some of the most rural of areas where states, having the ability to make some of their own decisions, can find that right sort of blend and mix, not only within a cost per location, but even the technologies maybe that are used there. Mm-hmm. I would just maybe add, from my company's perspective, and I believe on behalf of all of us in the association, we're generally supportive of principles in the speed to bead. That would also be helpful in allowing us to move forward with this, principles around some reduced regulation and flexibility, all based on the principle, I think, Jake, that you shared, where let the states review and decide that. So thank you all, appreciate that. States are moving forward with the BEAD process, and I guess, as Jennifer had mentioned, some are at different stages, but I think everybody's hoping to wrap some things up. What do you think is maybe the best way to implement some of these potential changes that may come without really slowing down the program even more? Or is there anything that can be done to help sort of keep that momentum?
It kind of ties in with another bigger picture issue, but permitting and environmental review reform, from my perspective, that's been a big delay for us. Like Jason, we've got a similar story. We were awarded a Reconnect Award 2023. We're still waiting on environmental review, so that's 2 years and going, 1,400 customers that are just waiting for service. And I think if you speed for BEAD, if you want to get it out there fast, let's look at those opportunities where there's already been an environmental review or it's already been disturbed, and let's just go. You don't have to look at it again.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think some other things you could do similarly is there are other programs that have already made awards. And so anything you can do to streamline in with those, with either locations adjacent to or utilizing people who have already been vetted, you can make some of these changes but still keep things moving.
Great.
And I'll speak from the policy side of things, which is when things are going well, you have to educate the state and federal lawmakers. You have to show that there's a demonstration of need to continue funding at certain levels. And so making sure that the stories are being told effectively so that they can see that the programs are working well.
Great. Thanks, Il.
Again, I'm going to echo Jake's on permitting. We have a NTIA project right now that has been in the works for nearly 6 years. And we just finally got through all of the approvals that we needed for that. And that's just simply too long to let folks wait, but especially, projects that are so impactful to a tribal community and the surrounding area. I would say if there's anything else we could do to just keep BEAD moving quickly is not allow it to get caught up in a lot of rhetoric. And I think that goes back to letting the states make decisions. But I feel like if we leave it at a federal level for a bunch of rhetoric to happen, that it's just going to slow it down and certainly the pause that we're experiencing today.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a great perspective. And I would maybe add, we're all representing different states that we serve. And as we look across the membership of the association, we're covering all of the 50 states. And Jennifer, as you'd mentioned, perhaps each state is a little bit further along than others in the process. And I guess from my perspective, I feel like that if we're really wanting to get it moving forward, it's great to look at changes that help facilitate getting those shovels into the ground quicker, being really careful about making other changes that potentially cause a step backwards in whatever that might be, whether it be reevaluations or reapplications. And so I feel like that it's maybe worth adding that into the conversation as well. Another sort of topic on BEAD, we briefly touched this, I think, but there is in this discussion the rhetoric that's happening about BEAD and some of the technological neutrality, how the service is delivered. Thinking about the different states that you each operate in, I'm just curious, is there a one-size-fits-all, or is there a right balance of different technologies, and who should be making those decisions that you want to chime in on?
We believe in fiber first. I think it's, Jason said it, it's scalable, it's durable, it's a long-term investment. There is a place, I think, for fixed wireless and LEO satellites, alternate technologies. I think the state's in the best position to decide that because it depends on geography and proximity to existing facilities and, a variety of other things that the states that are closer to the ground, they can make that determination.
Thank you.
I think, so I'm in Texas and we have everything from coastal beaches to mountains to everything in the middle. So there's definitely going to be a place for all of it. However, what I think we need to be cautious of is not equating technological neutrality with interchangeability. They're still not the same thing. That's just intellectually dishonest to say that when you're looking at fiber versus fixed wireless versus satellite, that you're getting the same thing for the long term. And so I don't think we want to get to a place where we are shortchanging the long-term impact of these dollars by going a different path. I also don't know that, and I'm just going to say it, I don't know that maybe some of the policy people are the ones that necessarily need to be making those decisions because they're not the ones that have to operate for the long term. A lot of us have operated different networks for many, many years. And so I think just ensuring that the state offices have the kind of technological know-how to know the difference, that if you do choose a different path, there are going to be offsets to that. And so being able to manage that for the long term and not just looking for tomorrow, but looking for really down the road.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Minnesotans expect fiber because we've had our broadband program in place for so long, and the stories of fiber are well known and consumers understand what fiber to their home means for them. That's what Minnesotans expect. And so there is an expectation level of how the money is spent. There's also a fiscal responsibility with fiber, and that is we have fiber that's been in the ground for 40 years, and we change the electronics on the end. And there's no other technology that's in the mix right now that says it has a 40-year lifespan.
Right.
And so even when you're looking at those extremely high-cost locations, divide those locations out by 40 years and what we're able to do with that. And so I think just fiscally to be responsible with the money, it's a fiber future.
Thank you. Zil, did you have a comment you were going to make on that?
The one thing I'll say is from the policy guys, right, is that we really need to look at it as this is a local issue. These people that are on the ground know exactly what they need. And so, yes, we'd love to say fiber first. That's obviously going to be a preference, but especially for the rural facilities where if you're driving through Mississippi and you're the only facility for 75 miles, you're going to take what you can get. And so ensuring that you're listening to the communities that are getting it first.
Yeah. And I think to that point, and as I think some of you have alluded to, the global policy can be somewhat dangerous, I think, because there are so many unique needs. And in my area, my home state of Wyoming, we had a situation where if you took the sum total of all the applicants, that included a mix between some fiber, some fixed wireless, and some satellite, there's a possibility to cover the entire state within the budget that's been allowed. And it's a way of maximizing the value, I think. And I know it's maybe an example of one, but it proves, I think, that if that decision making, that mix, that design can be done at a local level, at the state level, that solutions can be made that it has the potential to maximize the benefit for as many as possible, while still meeting some of the program objectives. All right, now we've got a couple of maybe specific or targeted questions. Zil, we'll maybe start with you first. We've got some good perspective from the carriers. Let's turn to some of the beneficiaries. Rural hospitals have a pretty clear technology need, and I was just curious, what would be the optimal technology that your long-term connectivity needs to maximize care in the rural communities?
Well, so thank you. There's a broad coalition of what is needed in rural spaces because we have at least within NRHA's membership, we have some hospitals that were built by World War II veterans that are still operating on the same infrastructure, all the way to facilities that were built last year, right? So broadband is sort of the backbone of the telehealth infrastructure. So that's going to be a component that's going to help with electronic records. That's going to help get grandma the needs that she needs when she is, 50 miles from a facility. But it's going to be that combination of fiber, broadband, Satellink, anything that they can get. So I don't want to give it on one particular issue, but we'll take anything that is going to be beneficial, and listening to the communities and the state's individuals that are running those programs and what they can do with it.
Okay, thank you. Jake, let's maybe turn attention to a little bit on the Universal Service Fund. I think many would agree this is critical to connectivity in America. We just saw the oral argument at the Supreme Court debating the constitutionality of the program. What would be the impact to your customers and the communities that you serve if the Supreme Court rules that USF is unconstitutional?
It'd be huge. We looked at this when the court first took up the case, and I did a quick analysis, took our annual support, divided it by the number of current customers, and just assumed that you had to replace, instead of getting it from USF, you had to get it from customers. In one of our study areas, we would have to increase rates by over $200 over and above current rates just to replace the USF revenue we get today, which is obviously not something we can do. They can't bear that and can't expect them to. We also looked at, okay, what if we spread it over special access circuits? But then you're hitting schools, libraries, rural healthcare facilities, you're hitting cell towers. At some point, those cell tower providers are going to see the costs go up and have to make a decision on whether they should continue to use fiber or switch to a microwave or something. So there's a lot of downstream effects, and that's not even looking at the Lifeline customers that are losing that credit that they're getting and immediately have an increase to their bill. No matter what decisions we make, they're just, if USF goes away, their bill goes up that next month. So,
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Jennifer or Christy, have you got anything else you want to add to that?
Jake pretty much covers it.
Same principles you're seeing in your areas?
Yep, absolutely. And when a program works, I think this is when I go back to when something works, just let it work. I mean, yes, there needs to be some reform. We all know and understand that. But don't break something that works today.
Sure. Zil, from the rural healthcare perspective, I mean, how would rural hospitals in the communities that they serve be impacted if the Universal Service Funds were to go away?
It'd be detrimental. Like it would knock out so much for the facilities. And kind of going to the point that you're making, which is that in this town, when a program, it's much harder to build something than to take it away. And when something's working, it needs to continue to work. And rural facilities depend so much on these funds. And so just watching it evaporate would kill a lot of facilities, honestly. Right now in the United States, 50% of all rural hospitals are operating either in the red or in the margins. And so taking away even just the little bits of credit that then they would have to pass on to the individuals that are coming to their facilities would be huge. And that means loss of care and then loss of life. And so that's the way we look at it, is that infrastructure is important. And if you're going to start taking away funding, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, and I think that gets magnified in rural communities. I think it's a little bit naive for us all to just assume we can raise our rates and that the customers can absorb it. And if the customers can't absorb it, then companies are put into some financial strain. And I don't think it's too far of a shout out to say it's potentially impacting public safety, rural cellular connectivity, as well as the rural healthcare and other sort of safety. So I just think it's the impacts are pretty wide sweeping.
Yeah. In our area, just to speak on the education front with E-rate, in our local area, we serve in the school districts that we serve in north central Minnesota, just the customers of CTC, it's over $800,000 of E-rate. That's educators. That's real classroom attention for our students, because that money is going to have to get shifted and likely just be labor cuts for a school district. And so I just think the trickle-down effect of E-rate being demised would be really tough for our kids.
Yeah, thank you. Some of us spent some time on the Hill while we were up here yesterday doing some visits. I know Jake, you and I were in some of those meetings together. And one of the things that came up quite frequently in those discussions is regardless of where this decision at the Supreme Court lands, whether it's in favor or not, there's going to be some continued conversations around contribution, distribution reform, revamping the Universal Service Program. How important is it that Congress turns quickly to that type of reform? And in order for Chris, you talk about if it's working, but there's clearly some changes that need to happen as well. Yeah. So how important is it that we quickly turn our attention to that regardless of where the Supreme Court lands?
And we needed the working group to make, the USF working group to make decisions last year, and not getting those has now caused another major pause. And I'm glad to see that Senator Fisher is going to step up and take some leadership. But now reconvening the working group, I just feel like it's just a long delay that really should have been in our hands in 2024. So regardless of the belief that we're behind, it needs to happen quickly. I mean, we've been waiting, and it needs to happen quickly and thoughtfully.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we don't want to do is take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So here we have these grant programs that are trying to push more connectivity out there. And the reality is that if this program, if USF continues, albeit a little bit dysfunctional, and then comes to a halt with nothing really to replace it, we're going to go backwards because we're going to lose connectivity in places. We did the same exercise that Jake did. And what you really boils down to is you can raise your rates by 200, 300, 400%, but people aren't going to pay it. And we can't continue to serve those areas that today are considered served if that goes away. And so what you really do is you just lose more connectivity. And so if we don't look ahead and see that gap is coming on how it's funded and where it goes, then I'm afraid we're just going to go backwards.
Yeah. So keeping that in mind then, just kind of keeping that thought going forward, how important is it then that USF contribution reform get done as a way of supporting all of the BEAD builds that may be accomplished as we move forward into the future? Any thoughts on that, Jake?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, the areas that are going to be served with BEAD-funded projects are currently unserved, underserved, probably most likely because they are high cost. And that's what one of the big USF programs is, high cost. So you've got to support that network. If you're going to put all that investment into building it, you've got to continue to support it over time and upgrade it and keep it updated.
Thank you. Any others?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that initial discussion of why is universal connectivity important? And we agree that it's important because we've put all this money into BEAD to connect those that are unconnected. And we talk a lot about that broadband's a pretty good business to be in. You get people on it, they don't turn it off. You know, we don't have less of an appetite for it. So if something is unserved today, it's because economically it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because there's not enough people in those areas to make it work. And so it's one thing to serve them, but there's a continuation of that service that has to happen. It's not a one and done. We all repair things every day. We're helping customers every day. And so without an ability to make that work economically, it doesn't matter what your structure is. You got to keep the doors open. And so we can connect them once, but if we want to have a long-term impact with this, it's going to take more.
For sure.
And
go ahead, Zell, sorry.
Building off of that, though, and that's the argument you need to be making to policymakers, which is when you take away certain protections, the immediate economic impact goes right into the communities. And that's what we see with the hospitals, is that when they get even the marginal numbers of funding pulled from underneath them, it immediately leads to closures in their facilities.
I would just echo all of these thoughts. We have to have USF. There's nothing to it.
I had some of the same thoughts, and as we were going around yesterday, I think one of the things we highlighted there is, and coming back to this under and unserved piece, when you have $42.5 billion of infrastructure going out into areas that by the program definition are under or unserved, even though fiber has the most favorable of operating expenses compared to perhaps other technologies, you're still going to be introducing a pool of operating expenses associated with managing that infrastructure that was built that is presently not even in the ecosystem of what the costs are. And so this discussion around the universal service reform should be an imperative that we follow through on, if for no other reason the fact that you're now introducing extended networks with extended costs that are just not even in place. So that's maybe one other piece to add to that. One other question, we kind of talked about permitting before, and I think we've got time for just maybe one more. Maybe we can move down and everybody share a horror story on permitting. And I'll lead. We're squarely focused on building this out as quickly as possible. We see challenges in permitting. I think one that I've shared in the past is we've got one area where, if you can believe it or not, in the mountainous terrain that we're in, Jason will believe this, we've got about a 6-week construction window, because between weather and migration and protected species, breeding season, wherever the limitations are, there's a short window. Took us 3 years to get the permit. At the end of that, by the time the permit finally came, it was at the end of the construction season, and some of the qualifications within the permit had expired before the next construction season could begin. And so there's just real challenges with this. And I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind, as we go down here in the next couple of minutes, just share some of the other challenges that your companies face when securing some of the permits from the communities that you serve, and perhaps as well as on some federal lands.
I don't know if it beats yours, but we had one that it was in county road right away, and there was it was Reconnect funded. There was already copper telephone line there, power, natural gas, and the county road had been plowed through there decades ago. And so this is previously disturbed, previously analyzed, and we had to go review it again. It took an extra, I can't remember, 6 or 12 months and another $20,000 in environmental review to look at something that's been looked at, I don't know how many times in the past. So.
And I'm going to comment, is that good use of federal funding? Because, I mean, I'm going to go back to the fiscal responsibility in this money. That is previously disturbed right away. It's been done. And why are we spending more of our federal funding dollars on something that's been completed? We just have to be more economically responsible with it.
Yeah, especially when there's already so many limitations on the manpower that's needed for it. Finding ways where the work has already been done to kind of help automate that process along the way seems to be a good logical solution for sure. And of course, I think we're all concerned with a program, especially like BEAD, where there's a prescribed time frame with performance metrics along the way, where you've got some of the complications of permitting to be able to accomplish that. It really gets in the way of the objectives. So, well, listen, I want to thank everybody and for your participation. It was a really good conversation, but unfortunately, we're going to have to call it here. Let's give a round of applause for the panel and everybody's participation. The good news is that we get to keep the conversation rolling, and I know we've got a couple of other good meetings scheduled through the association in the next couple of days. Moderating our next discussion will be U.S. Telecom CEO Jonathan Spalter. And Jonathan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very, very much. Jeff, that was really, really well done. I just think another round of applause for that fantastic group. I mean, what I was listening to most of all was not just the importance of the programs that we hold dear and the reforms that we need, but what I was hearing was the commitment that all of you have to your communities in such a profound way. It's so important. I'd also just like to say a big thank you, not just to all of you in this room, but to the many hundreds of folks that are joining us through the power and promise of American connectivity that is largely provided by the innovative broadband providers that we very proudly represent here at U.S. Telecom. I wanted to turn to another set of really important issues that really is top of mind. My job is to moderate a conversation about something I don't think any of us are particularly moderate about, which is the need for new approaches to modernizing our networks, but also the mindsets and the policies that will be more relevant for the 21st century. I mean, look, consumers, as we know, have made it very clear that the future is broadband. And part of the secret sauce of achieving that future is modernizing not just our networks, but the outdated regulations and mindsets that are holding us back. We need to forge creative, forward-looking solutions about how we write together collectively here in Washington, in the states, in our municipalities, the new rules of the road. Christie said very wisely that when something isn't broke, we shouldn't really fix it. But I think fundamentally, we all agree that there are many things that are broken about the carriage that has come our way from the many outdated rules that we need to fix right away. And we have a fantastic group of colleagues and friends to help really map that future for us. Let me introduce them from left to right. First, it's Harold Zeitz, who is the CEO of Ziply Fiber. Welcome, Harold. Steve Tungetman, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Brightspeed. I'm glad to have Melissa Mann, who is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs at Lumen.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Melissa. And Rhonda Johnson, who is the Executive Vice President for Federal Regulatory Affairs at AT&T, and also our host today. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to tee off not with a softball, but with a general question to set the table for our discussion, which is really, what do you all see as the risk for your efforts to connect consumers to next generation broadband if government policies still require us to maintain your, call it 8-track or Betamax technologies that simply don't keep pace with innovation? In fact, I think calling them 8-track or Betamax is actually not exactly right, because they're more like a century-old technologies in many cases. So why don't we just go down the line? And Rhonda, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having this panel, because it is something that we all feel very strongly about and have been working on for years. I would say it is so essential for AT&T and for other companies here, I think, to make sure that we're investing in the right services and the infrastructure that is demanded by our consumers, whether they be businesses or consumers in their homes and everyday lives. And the current rules and regulations that have existed now for decades and decades need to be reformed, changed, in many cases eliminated. So whether that's at the federal level or at the state level, we cannot continue to maintain and operate two different networks, and in some cases more than that, but these antiquated networks, these switches, infrastructure, and copper networks that are out there that were built and served us very well. But now it's all about fiber. It's the new services and technologies that are delivering what we need and demand to do for our customers. So the rules and regulations need to change so that these critical capital dollars that we have and that we are trying to do and invest wisely for our consumers are being put to the right places. So we need to work, and we are dedicated. I know myself and my team and our colleagues here at US Telecom are working every day to try and make sure we're doing the reforms that are needed.
Well said. And I think maybe that's a good segue to you, Harold, from your Chief Executive Officer perspective, where you really are focused on allocation of resources. How do the requirements that you must maintain old and outdated copper networks affect your company's capital allocation decisions about where and how much fiber to deploy?
Yeah, so I think everybody has constraints. You've got to spend some total amount of money and divide it. So I think there's some natural things associated with that. The more that we spend to maintain antiquated systems, the less we're able to spend elsewhere. But I actually think that to me it's less about us and profitability and access to capital and so on. It's more about our customers who are using these older technologies. And we're actually not doing them a service. We're doing them a disservice, because there are failure points that just cannot be solved. We have switches that are older than I am that sometimes when they fail, cannot be resurrected. And that's actually not good for the customer. I think we all have this problem with vandalism for copper, and it takes sometimes days or longer to repair that. There's not the same for fiber because there's not the market to sell that. So actually, just maybe to turn it a little bit on its head. I think this is something that we are doing on behalf of our customers. And maybe need to articulate that a little bit differently, because it's not a service to our customers for them to use something that's dying. It's not dying because we don't want to invest. There's not another switch I can get. There's not equipment that I could replace this with. And the people that even know how to use this are retired or gone. So I actually think, yes, there are some, to your question, we can only spend so much money on different things. The more we spend on copper, the less we can on fiber. But what we'd like to do is get people on technology that can deliver communications, and this is primarily phone, right? That communications that will enable them for it to work in all circumstances. And so I think it's sort of an opportunity for us to articulate it related to customers and doing them a service.
Well said. And by the way, I just heard anecdotally that some of our members who are having to maintain copper networks literally have to go to eBay to get old supply inputs.
100% true. In some cases, we've found where we literally cannot replace a failed part, and we're scrambling to connect to another device, and it can take days or weeks to recover that.
Yeah. Steve or Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll just add, you asked originally about the risk. Essentially, what is the risk of not making this transformation? For Lumen, if you've been following us, we're making a pretty bold transformation as a company right now, really investing heavily in the network to support the backbone for the AI economy, for cloud, for next generation services. And the U.S. is really at a critical inflection point right now, where this is truly a global race when we think about AI. And so anytime you're diverting capital away from the infrastructure layer that's going to support that technology that needs significant investment, this becomes a question of national security when you are diverting capital away from that investment. And that's what these policies do. They essentially divert capital investment away from modern next generation technologies to antiquated facilities.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I mean, it's literally, if you're going to take a dollar, where are you going to invest? Are you going to invest in antiquated, unsecure technology, or are you going to move forward in the new technology? To use your 8-track analogy, I mean, imagine if we were required to continue telegraphs and telegrams as opposed to emails and internet. It just doesn't make sense to do that. And when you're taking your investment dollars, and generally about 7-8% of the population uses copper voice, and you're putting that much capital into investing in that small of a population, it just doesn't lead to progress, doesn't make sense.
And that requirement only is actually focused on one small part of our communications ecosystem, and that just is not an issue of equity.
Right.
And in the spirit of careful what you wish for, we're talking about BEAD and USF and other things. I think we're sitting here where we are on copper in part because, look, there were subsidies to build that network and agreements and access and right of way. So there are rules that were put in place a long time ago that just didn't have the foresight. We're at a moment now with BEAD and now wanting to change USF and other things where we're going to have to try to think as a policy level, how do we make it so rules we put in place now consider the future?
Right.
And I'm sorry, and if you think about BEAD, the government has decided to invest $42.5 billion to get to fiber and to get to new technologies. Clearly, we need the federal and local level to align around that desire and that objective.
You mentioned aspiring towards new rules. There's some good news.
Yes.
That this FCC and its chairman, Brendan Carr, have been very resolute about working with us and broader parts of the communications ecosystem to move forward in new ways, including a recent set of rules that were established by the Wireline Bureau that will actually move us forward on network modernization. And we're really grateful for their a very quick move to actually grant the waiver that we petitioned for. Steve, you at Brightspeed have been really looking at opportunities to move and modernize your networks. What do you think these new rules are going to yield for you?
Absolutely. First of all, I really do have to thank U.S. Telecom for taking the opportunity to coalesce in the industry and really helping to get these rules issued. It was we know how integral you were to
Well,
this.
our legal and regulatory team
Yes.
did a great job, as well as other members of the team.
Thank you. And kudos to Chairman Carr for getting the the Wireline Competition Bureau to move forward. I mean, for Brightspeed, if we look at it as a whole in terms of our objective for copper retirement, we look at three things and three benefits. One, the fact that there's no longer need for standalone VoIP, which means we actually can retire copper where we have fiber and fiber voice available, eventually 4G. Two, in terms of an adequate replacement, the ability eventually to have 4G fixed wireless as an opportunity to not have to keep the copper going and having the ability to do that. And then really the ability not to have to do all the filings and the applications every time there is a grandfathering or a retirement. That's all really, really helpful to getting fiber to the communities.
Right. Well, you just won the prize, Steve, because you offered our first acronym, VoIP, Voice over Internet.
Voice over IP, yes.
But as long as we're on acronyms, let's move to Kohler, carrier of last resort. And I want to bring this to you, Rhonda. AT&T, rightly so, and with a lot of careful thinking, has been focused on reforming carrier of last resort rules throughout your national footprint. California has been ground zero for a lot of that effort. There is new initiative to move new legislation through Sacramento, which is a very good thing. Can you help us understand what the outdated approach to carrier of last resort has meant for not just AT&T, but the consumers that you've been serving across that state?
Well, first I want to amplify what you just shared about what Chairman Carr has been doing. That helps set a momentum across, I think, for all of us, not only from the federal level, but also in certain states, to see that you can take these advancements and do things and watch the carriers respond in all the right ways in the investments that they're making. And I really feel like, what used to take months and months can take weeks, and then you can get things done and you can deliver. In California, which I spent probably 16 years of my career in California, it's a beautiful state, but they have a few issues around regulation. They have lots that they like to say and do, and it is a Gordian knot to work through, whether you're at the California Commission or in Sacramento. And I would say we are excited to have a piece of legislation that hopefully will move through, and it'll be in steps. I understand there that people are very concerned about what changes may be coming, and I think there's a perception and that someone is taking away their phone. And we really need to make sure that people understand that we're talking about modernizing. We're talking about meeting the needs that consumers have already spoken what they want. In fact, we spend $1 billion a year in California maintaining this old network, just in California, where 95% of the customers have left it.
Right.
So you're keeping this up. And again, this critical, sort of infrastructure that, you're trying to invest in, and BEAD and other things showing that this is what is being, put forward by this administration and the previous administration to connect everyone. You cannot continue to support this when you have to, move forward. So for customers there, it's an energy hog. It definitely does not meet the needs, whether you're in a business or in a consumer's home. And it's not good we heard from the healthcare world and the education world. They're all looking to broadband to be delivering services that are being demanded, even in the most rural areas. So it really is, unfortunately, in a state that likes to think of themselves and have the most innovation, they're really backward looking in this regard. And it is incumbent upon all of us as we advocate to try and move this forward at the commission and at the legislature, that we talk about what it means to deliver these services and to remove some of these barriers that are costing not just us, but sort of serving the marketplace there in California. So there are a lot of things that hopefully will make a difference in the next few weeks. It's a critical time there at the legislature for that piece.
But we also know that what what goes on in California doesn't always stay in California. In fact, there have been a number of initiatives across the country to advance fundamental, smart, common sense reform to Kohler. In fact, Lumen, Melissa, has been at the forefront of actually moving several of those initiatives. I know this is a very important issue for Lumen and your national footprint. What do you see going on in the states where it's been hard to get reform, and what does that mean for your customers as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring a little bit of hope here. We're coming off a win in Utah that we feel really good about. We did get a piece of legislation passed to provide Kohler relief there in the state of Utah. And we're having positive conversations with our colleagues at Windstream, AT&T, Brightspeed, others in other states where you're just starting to see what I'm going to say is sort of common sense prevail here. We've got a copper network where landlines today, less than a quarter of households actually even have a landline. And then those that are landline only, where that's their only, is really at 1% of the population. So that's what we're regulating for at this point in time. And I just think it becomes very difficult to make this, for the other side to make the argument that this landline copper technology is the most reliable and best product for that customer. And I'm really, again, I want to compliment the efforts of US Telecom and our industry peers, because everyone's coming to the table with creative solutions. We've said, okay, we're going to solve this through technology, through investment in fiber, and other creative things like AT&T really got the ball rolling with the AT&T Phone Advanced product, which again is another solution here that can help these customers have more reliable, more stable connections and really deliver for those customers.
Well, very well said. It's also interesting, just to add as a small point, this is not a partisan issue. You have states like Illinois and Colorado and Minnesota that are advancing fundamental reforms to thinking anew and in fresh ways about not leaving any customers in those states behind with outdated networks by moving them in a phased way without flash cuts to new technologies. And they're matched by, I think now it's over 20 other states that have been active in this.
In our 21 state footprint for ILEC, California is the only state that really hasn't taken this last step for state regulation around Kohler. Mm-hmm. Everyone else has, I think, recognized and has had a plan, whether it's metered or not, they're knowing and seeing that this is the right thing to do.
Right. Well, as governments across the country and here in Washington rev up the weed whacker and begin to try to clear out more of the necessarily try to clear out more of the regulatory underbrush that's making it harder to get to where we want to be in American connectivity, not only on a number of issues, but also and importantly on modernizing our networks. Let's talk a little bit about what else the federal government you think could or should do at the federal level to free up your companies and, in a sense, your customers to have better connectivity rather than maintaining these underutilized, energy hog, old networks that we know are no longer viable for our modern needs.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about the states that have done this. I'm not sure Washington and Oregon is quite up to speed with the rest of those 20 states, but from my perspective, I actually am not concerned about having the Kohler obligation. I just want to be able to deliver services over any medium, and I want to have the ability to do so whether I own the underlying physical network or not. And then I'm happy to deliver those services. I think that's sort of the big rub at the state level. That's the big rub that we have about the ownership of those assets, because we can deliver in our states across different mediums. Certainly fiber is acceptable, but the ownership of those. So I think to the extent that the federal government, the FCC can, continue the great progress they've had in the last, several months, and driving the states toward just considering maybe we don't press so hard for Kohler relief as much as medium choice. And and not having to have ownership, but to be able to resell if we need to on those networks. Because I think that's ultimately what we want. I do think there's a little bit of a thing that we should be thinking about, because we just talked about USF and things like that. There will be fewer phone customers as we get them off copper. Because like it or not, there are some people that are on copper only because there's tip and ring and there's power online. And they just believe in that you can say what you want about backup, but they believe in that. And so I think these things all kind of go together on this older technology. We just need to consider them holistically.
I think we continue to be concerned with Kohler relief and would like to see that. And we're working with the industry in places like Pennsylvania to accomplish that. But I think in terms of the underbrush, it goes a lot back to what the previous panel was discussing, what Harold alluded to, along permitting. And again, if the objective is to build fiber, we need to do it quickly. We need to do it efficiently. And the permitting, as discussed in the previous panel, is quite an issue from that perspective. And then the affordability and adoption, and you go back to the Affordable Connectivity Program and how effective that was, and now it's not being funded. We really do need some funding there from the perspective of educating, getting people to in underserved areas
Right.
be able to afford it after all the investment is put in.
I just read, Steve, that your goal has been raised, your KPI from 4 million new connections to 5 million new connections, which is really admirable in an environment where we want to connect more Americans.
Yes, and
That's our form.
I'm sorry, John.
But the question is, can we get there if there still are anchors around those goals called Kohler obligations?
It'll be difficult to get there in the time frame we would like to get there. So those are the things we just need to keep pushing and getting more efficient.
Can I add a couple?
Please.
I feel like, again, this chairman at the FCC has done a lot to sort of put his foot on the accelerator on some of these issues, but I think there's more that could be done as we look to, and we brought this up, there's a lot happening with copper theft. There's a lot happening in climate change and storms and events where networks are destroyed. Again, coming from California, whether it's earthquake, mudslides, fires, when something destroys a network, the fact that you may need to rebuild copper to have those same services does not make sense. And I'm really hoping that we as an industry and in working with the FCC can look at how we do that as far as the obligations, what's under the 214 obligations to when you, again, major copper theft, an incident or a disaster, that we can do this in a much more efficient, streamlined manner and not have it be copper.
And as I understand it, especially given the tremendous tragedies that we've seen in the fires in Southern California, there are those interests still in California policy land that are saying that AT&T has to continue to invest $1 billion to support networks that are incompatible with the next generation public safety networks, which doesn't make sense, I think, to anybody.
No, I agree 100%. You have to connect the dots. And I feel like, we're all going to next gen 911 systems. We're looking at how we move all of these systems to an IP world. And rebuilding on a TDM-based copper network does not make sense.
I agree. And I'll just add, we talked about it a little bit on the last panel, in addition to all these reforms that we've spoken about, permitting reform, if we're going to hit those targets of, for your company, 5 million living units, we've got to address permitting reform, because that's absolutely a bottleneck and a slowdown. And I can't stress the importance of really pro-growth, pro-investment tax policy as well, and helping to ensure that we can make the investments necessary to make to do the network modernization. But I do think, going back to what you started with, the reforms that we've seen out of the FCC and under Chairman Carr have been a really positive step in the right direction. We'd gone a long time without seeing some of those reforms. And so, we would love to see, in addition, some work around wireless as an adequate replacement, maybe at some point in time around satellite, again, being an adequate replacement for voice services, just as we continue to move these customers to more modern technologies.
Completely agree. And I think you raised a very good point, which is that there isn't all of the above mantra that we have to actually take when we're thinking about the overall migration to network modernization. There are many solutions that can be applicable. We only have a couple of minutes, and this is the time where we always have to sort of take out the crystal ball. We were talking about the need for speed, but we also know that we are ready to push the pedal to the metal on deployment, on connectivity, but there are many places in the policy world that are pumping the brakes. We've heard on permitting, network modernization challenges, Kohler. If you could look ahead, unencumbered by a lot of these challenges that we still are facing, what does the communication landscape look 3 years from now or 10 years from now? Where are we going to, and what will that transformation mean for your customers, our economy, the future of AI, and our society? Big question.
Yeah, I mean, AI, Melissa mentioned, you just mentioned, I think that's a disruptor, game changer across our industry. Obviously, for our workforces, for how and what we do in serving our customers. I think it even is a more sort of proof point about why we need to get rid of the old. I mean, we're going to need a lot of energy to power AI and all these data centers. Get the energy that's consumed by the old networks is significant. But I really see, and I don't have a very clear crystal ball into how AI, but I know our company is very interested in how we can look to make changes that help us serve our customers better and help advance sort of the speed and how we can deliver services.
Yeah, I think the volume, capacity, bandwidth needs of AI, of having a hologram of your doctor or education. I mean, all these different things we're talking about. Certainly, to me, 10 years from now, we're going to be in a fiber and wireless and satellite will be the main mediums. That there'll be almost no copper left, or God forbid, no copper left. I think it's an understated thing that Rhonda just brought up about power usage, because in our states we're having issues of more data centers and insufficient power and high use of power by copper. So there are some things where we can really get better aligned on all of that. I think in the 3 years, I think it's going to be more of the same in hand-to-hand combat. But 10 years, I think it's clear that direction.
I think the networks are not only going to be faster, they're going to be a lot smarter. I think that's what we're seeing and where innovation is going. I'll go with 3 years, because 10 years at the pace of innovation, projecting 10 years out gets a little hazy for me. But I think we're already seeing that demand in terms of faster, smarter networks when we see the demand from the hyperscalers around the connectivity that they need for these data centers. And then as that distributes, as we see those data centers just, decentralize into more rural locations, we just added one, Meta's adding a data center in North Louisiana in what is a very rural part of the country. Happens to be our headquarters as well. But so as you see that decentralization, I think the networks having to evolve and be smarter, because it's not just about moving data quickly, it's about moving data efficiently based on workload, location, and usage type. And so I think, again, it's going to be not just faster, but smarter networks.
Yeah, I mean, it's about enablement of all these things up the stack. If you think about just what basic broadband engendered, from social media to health to telemedicine, you go to the macro level, the entire country.
Right.
It's enablement for our economy and progression.
And speaking of enablement, and I want to thank each of you for a really fantastic conversation, but I'm struck by just the four individuals on our panel today represent American innovative companies that literally are connecting over 100 million people, employing hundreds of thousands of women and men in fantastic work, creating enormous amount of opportunity, literally in every state in our country. And by the way, investing tens of billions of dollars annually in doing so. So we wish you all will continue to be enabled in doing your work. I want to thank you for a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, Before you all go, I just want to mention that we're speaking about a lot of old technologies here. AT&T has a wonderful exhibit next door of a lot of those relics. I invite you to spend some time checking them out. It's a really, really great exhibit. And I just wanted to close our American Connectivity Forum by, first of all, thanking all of you for spending your time and some of your afternoon to hear and listen and share ideas. Please, we have time to connect with each other, not just virtually, but in person. Thank you to our folks that joined us virtually. But I also want to thank all of our speakers, my amazing team here at US Telecom for their tireless, relentless efforts to move forward our connectivity future. And of course, our amazing US Telecom members for doing what you do. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next year.